Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 432 and my guest is Syre. Syre is a film and television writer, stand-up comic, retired adult film star, and podcaster who co-hosts Ill Repute, a podcast about history's most transgressive women. She also has a great TikTok that's sassy and informative, and she's led a fascinating life. I think you're going to find this to be a wild ride. Really interesting, incredibly bright human, and I'm looking forward to you hearing this. If you're in the Rehoboth Beach, Delaware area, come see my film The First on Friday, November 8th at 3:30 p.m. for the Rehoboth Beach Independent Film Festival. Love to meet you. Come on down and say hello. Otherwise, check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show. Hey Human Podcast is on YouTube under Official Susan Ruth. I'm on Patreon at Susan Ruthism. My TikTok and Instagram is Susan Ruthism. Check out SusanRuth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors and find my albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your music. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, be love. Here we go. Syre, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you for having me, human.
Tell me where you're from. What was childhood like?
I was born in Ashland, Oregon. I grew up in Fresno, California. And both of my parents were addicts. So I kind of became like a Nepo baby. But they were in recovery early on in my childhood. I grew up in the rooms. Pluses and minuses. I think my verbal skills were always really high. Because I was used to being in rooms with people that were being incredibly vulnerable and telling a lot of really insane stories that I probably should not have heard. But it definitely made me, as a younger person, very wise, because I got to see this slice of humanity that most people will never see. And to grow up and be a kid, and so you have zero judgment. You're just listening to the stories. You know, you don't know that they're weird or they're wrong or they're abnormal or they're traumatic, or you don't have any of that context because you're a child. So you're just listening and taking it in, and you're getting to see people tell those stories when they're being super vulnerable and super honest. So that was an advantage. And then having parents that were working a program meant that I was equipped early in life with like a set of problem solving skills. Because I would be in the rooms while they're working steps, while they're working with sponsors, while they're working with their sponsor. And so it was just ambient noise in the background, was constantly self-reflection, self-evaluation, accountability, vulnerability. So those became things I was just very comfortable with right away. And I think that has had a huge impact on my worldview, and definitely on my comedy and on my writing in terms of the subjects that I gravitate to and the kind of writing that I do, the kinds of scenarios I create, the kinds of characters I create. It's very easy for me to create very flawed and likable characters. And I like to start characters off in a very shocking situation, because I also like to involve myself in a little bit of like audience terrorism. So I like to kind of take an audience and just like drop them in the shit and let them figure out like how they're going to get out of it. And I'd say that at first, I think when I was younger, that was very difficult because I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't conscious of what I was doing, because keep in mind, I'd been hearing these stories my whole life. I didn't know they were inappropriate. I didn't know there was a time and a place. I didn't know they were upsetting. I just knew they were stories and they were human experiences. And they were really interesting to me. You know, I was just very interested in people. As a kid, I was a really good student. I was very focused, very nerdy, very literate. And I was obsessed with psychology and things like that. I was really obsessed with the idea of human motivation, why people do what they do. And part of that was because my parents were chaotic, because even in recovery, addicts are addicts. And it takes I think my mom, who's like in her 70s now, I think she just calmed the fuck down maybe 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Like it takes a long time to heal that stuff that drives people to addiction in the first place. So even though they weren't actively using when I was a teenager, it was like they still had all the behaviors and all the anger and all the entitlement and all the emotional immaturity and chaos. My childhood, I felt, was very emotionally chaotic. My basic immediate needs were met, but my emotional needs were not met, like, at all. At all. Like, my parents were both very narcissistic. And that's one of the pitfalls, I think, of the the program. One of the pitfalls of it can be that it can encourage a kind of really kind of solipsistic, kind of narcissistic self-involvement, which is necessary. But when you have kids to raise, you need to be teaching them, like, how to regulate their emotions, and they need to feel a sense of safety and a sense of encouragement. And I always felt, from the time I was born, I felt like I was very much like on my own. Like, I wasn't hampered per se, but I also wasn't supported. It was kind of like, she'll figure it out. And I mean, I did, but there are times when I sit back and reflect and be like, man, it would have been so cool if I just felt like supported. That would have been so awesome. There are just like a lot of things that, like, I had to really overcome, a lot of anxieties without anyone to show me how to do it. That was my childhood. I was a total overachiever. I graduated when I was 16, started college when I was 16, was in graduate school by like 19.
Was that a way to escape your family? Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm curious, did they bring you to the 12-step programs? Do they bring you in there as a way as a cautionary tale, if you will, or do you think
they couldn't afford babysitting? There was just a whole crew of kids that we were all kind of the same age, and we were old enough that we could be told to go play outside, but we were too young to be left home. And so it was just kind of like the meeting would start. It would usually be at a church or a Knights of Columbus, which meant that sometimes it might have a playground. And so, you know, you'd have kids from the ages of like 3 and 4 up to like 12, 13, and you would find your age mate, and like you would just kind of find shit to occupy yourself. But a lot of times it was just sitting on the floor in the back and sucking on sugar cubes next to the coffee machine and kind of like waiting for it to be over, you know. And then occasionally like something would happen. And I think like for me, it was this experience of seeing people that were like heavily tattooed, pierced, gang affiliated, ethnically super diverse, queer, a lot of gay, a lot of trans. Like, before that was acceptable, but these were people that had, you know, had found their way into recovery. And so it also, I think, was just really gave me this exposure to like a huge cross section of people that I just found really, really interesting. And the thing about drug addicts is like, they're so charismatic. So I used to enjoy going to the meetings too, just because there were so many personalities there.
Oh yeah.
And there are people that were just fun to hear speak, and like just kind of you like to hear them tell their stories because they were just so crazy.
Did you have in your mind, there's no way I'm ever going to do drugs because of this? Or was there a part of you that thought, I'm kind of fascinated by this fire they've all danced in?
I started coke the first time when I was like 9. We just lived in neighborhoods where like my friend and my older brothers his older brother was a drug dealer, and they found it. And then we were like, what is this? I didn't start drinking alcohol until I was like 18 or 19, because I was like, that shit'll kill you. I had a big thing about alcohol, and I've never done heroin, and I don't like taking pain meds, anything like that. It's just something I don't even want to like approach. But I ended up getting super involved in drugs in high school, middle school and high school and stuff. Actually, the first thing I was on was meth. I was a super overachiever. I was a ballerina, and it was like, here's this thing that you can snort. It's really cheap. Everyone has it. And you can stay up all night studying. You won't want to eat, so you won't be fat. I was like, where's the downside? For me, I always felt like I used it as like a performance enhancer.
Like Adderall, or was it actually
meth?
Getting meth?
Meth. Like, it was meth.
Okay.
It was speed. That was like the big thing in my community. Fresno had a lot of gang stuff, and it has a big agricultural center. And so a lot of people that work in the fields and work in the abattoirs and like work in the dairies, drug dealers come in and they're usually living in these like tenements kind of next to the farm situation. And they're working like 12 to 14-hour shifts. And so drug dealers come in and they sell them meth so that they can work for like these really long hours. And then their kids and other people that aren't yet working will start to get involved. They'll get recruited in to do sales and things like that. And then it kind of bleeds into the city. That's how it happened in the valley anyway. So everyone had it. It was, like I said, it was very cheap. As a high schooler, like you could afford it. Like you could buy, like you could go in and it would last. And it was just part of the culture. Like it was just like everyone was kind of on it. That was the party drug. Cocaine was like way too sophisticated for us. But like alcohol, weed, and speed were things that were easily obtained. I had strong feelings about alcohol and downers, but the first time that I tried meth, I remember just feeling like my life changed. And like it felt like coming online for the first time in my life. And I was diagnosed with ADHD at the same time and had refused medication because I thought it was going to inhibit my creativity. So I had been diagnosed with ADHD, but like refused treatment, not realizing when I started doing meth that was essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think the reason I reacted to it the way I did was because I actually had like a brain chemistry issue. So I was literally self-medicating because I was starting to find things difficult that other people seem to do easily. Executive level function, remembering things.
Part of that is a PTSD response, of course.
Yeah. Like I had a lot of issues around like sensory issues, wanting to be like I was a very social person, but I required a lot of alone time. I like retreated into fantasy worlds for prolonged periods of time, and I didn't like to be disturbed from those things. I hyper focusing on certain things. And my mom said I was always someone that didn't need a lot of socialization, even though I was very social. She used to always joke, like, I could just leave you alone for hours and hours and like you never complained. Like you just never even, I would come back and you would just be in the middle of something and you would get upset with me for disturbing you. So, which was like, I think for a lot of kids have the opposite experience. The parent goes away and you just want them to come back. And I wasn't like that. And then I got into college and like, I was just really obsessed with getting out of like the hood, getting out of the ghetto. Like I just wanted out, and education was shown as like, that was like the thing that was supposed to do that.
Only child? Was it just you?
No, I have an older brother. I was the one that was like the straight A student and all the things. He was the one that his problems manifested with a lot of acting out and just like a lot of like polar opposites. It's like he was just constantly ditching school, wouldn't stay in school, didn't care about anything, was like angry at everyone, hated our parents. And I was the opposite. I was just never a problem. Because my whole thing was like, I'm leaving you guys like any minute now. So like, do whatever the fuck you want. I don't give a shit. I'm going to be out of here. And then I graduated when I was 16 and I got accepted to UNLV and I was super excited because I was going to go to Las Vegas. And my mom was like, you are 16 years old. You're out of your fucking mind if you think I'm going to let you leave this house before you turn 18. And so I ended up going to Fresno City College and I was like, fine, I can bide my time. No problem. When I turned 18, I moved out and I would have gone to another university. But at that point, like I always knew I was a good writer, but like at that, I'm not a good writer. I always knew that I liked to write and that I did well in writing and I did well in English. So I knew that was my strong subject. I also knew that writers were very poor. So I had been interested in maybe doing psychology, something like that. But when I left City College, they were offering me some grants to go to Fresno State in the English program. And it was kind of like, well, I mean, I don't have any money, so who am I to turn that down? So I ended up staying put, not so much because I wanted to, but just because I didn't want to turn down free money. And it was right there. And so that kind of got me into the path of being a writer because that's where the offer was. And then when it was time to leave there, they were like, well, if you come do graduate school with us in the creative writing program, like we'll give you some scholarships. And so it was like, okay. And so I kind of fell into getting this education that's totally impractical. I have a terminal degree in poetry. Like, it's so impractical. That kind of was my childhood. Was like, it was just me kind of running to get out, to get somewhere. And then I left grad school and I was like, now what? And then my life took a turn.
And what happened next?
I double majored in poetry and creative nonfiction. And I thought, oh, I will I'll be like a long form journalist. That's what I'll do. I'll make documentaries. I'll be like Adam Curtis. I'll do like cultural commentary. It'll be really cool. Publishing had just been completely devastated by the internet. So, I mean, that had been like a slow process happening. Like, and I remember as a kid, the first time they let bloggers at like the DNC, and they were like, bloggers, like journalists. And like, now that's so funny, right? But yeah. but you know, it was what it was. So I knew that something was coming for our jobs. And then when I got to the job market, it was like people were paying like $50 an article for like a 1,200 word article. No newspapers were folding. Everything had gone digital. And in addition to having gone digital, no one had a budget for investigative reporting or anything like it. So I just looked around and was like, okay, like this is like not where it's at. Like, this is not going to cut it. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I had a little bit of a breakdown because the thing I liked about school and what attracted me to school and what made me so nerdy was that the rules were very clear. You show up, you do the work, you pass the test, you get the good grade, you are promoted on. Everything made sense. And my home life wasn't like that. My home life was a mystery. It's like, if the wind blew the wrong direction, was mom going to be a nervous wreck or was she going to be a raging lunatic? I don't know. Right. So I had taken solace in school because I was like, at least it's just, I know what is expected of me. I know what I have to do to deliver excellence, and then I can do it. And I am moved along in the process. So to leave grad school and find that what I had planned on doing just didn't exist anymore meant I had to kind of figure out what I was going to do next. And I do not do well in that kind of, I'm not a good like decision maker. So I kind of went crazy for like a year or two.
Were you still doing math?
Yes. I had stopped and then I like started again. I ended up getting in a job at a bar. I got a guy. It was abusive. It was bad. And I finally like decided I needed to reset. So I moved back in with my dad, my adoptive father. I was like, okay, I'm just going to like sit here and like detox.
So adoptive father, meaning not the original parents we talked about earlier, different father?
Different father. He adopted me when I was 3. So I have 2 dads and a mom.
Got it.
So my biological father was someone I saw like 2 weeks a year until I was like 12. And then I didn't have to see him anymore. And I was like, it wasn't that he was bad. It was just like, there was no connection. We just never connected like in that way. And so I moved back in with my adoptive father. I say adoptive father, just I call him dad, but like, and I kind of sat there for like 6 or 8 months, just detoxing and just thinking and just trying to figure out what to do next. And I figured, well, doing it with like a plan didn't get me anywhere because life and the world happened and colluded to deny me what I wanted. So it was a global conspiracy directed at me.
They always are.
So I kind of went back to the drawing board and was like, okay, like, what would I do if there were no guardrails? I had been in beauty pageants and had modeled a little bit and had been suggested to Playboy a few times, but had always been like, no, that's such a sellout thing to do. Like, I'm smart enough. I don't need to do that. And there was this site called God's Girls. It was like a competitor to Suicide Girls, and it was LA based. And they were offering all this money And I thought, why don't I just like do it once to say I did it, and then I can take the money and like backpack around Europe and like write a novel or something and then figure it out when I get home. So I did that, and the guy that photographed me fell in love with me, and I fell in love with him too. He was very charming, a guy named Josh Darling. And so I flew out to New York to shoot with him, and I never came home. We decided we were going to like do some kind of art project together, do something. And so I was just working as a model in New York and just kind of enjoying being young and not having a plan, because it was so new to me to not have a plan.
Were you doing fine art modeling, or were you doing like Vogue stuff? What were you doing?
Fine art, but I did do stuff for like Vogue Italia. Like occasionally I would do stuff that was like whatever, but I shot with, my first photo shoot was with this guy named George Pitts, who's no longer with us, who was the founding editor of Vibe magazine. And that was like my first paid photo shoot. And he became a really lifelong friend until he passed. I was doing that for like about a year and kind of just enjoying all of that. And then I got scouted by like a feminist porn director out in LA. And she found me through Twitter, because I think the brand I started to evolve was I started using Twitter, and I was using it as a place to write jokes. I didn't use it as like a microblog. I used it as a place to just write jokes. I didn't know I was a comedian yet. I knew that I loved stand-up comedy and thought it'd be cool to do that, but I didn't know how people became stand-up comedians. But I was using Twitter as like a writing exercise. It was just a place to write jokes. And I started to get a lot of attention on there because of that. People felt like they didn't expect someone that looked the way I did to be funny or smart. And that, like, it's not like that now. But this was in like 2009. In 2009, people still really didn't expect a lot from people that got naked in front of a camera. At the time, people thought, like, well, you look like that, but like you're making these really smart jokes. And I was like, of course, I have a graduate education. Like my jokes are fucking ridiculous. They're so fucking elitist, right? But like I didn't fit the profile of someone that was expected to be naked on camera, right? Now, not so much. Now people know better, you know, but at the time they didn't. And so it did kind of, it definitely set me out. And this is kind of before people talked about having brands. I recognize now I was building a brand. I didn't realize I was doing that at the time, but I realize now, like I was building a brand, and that brand was, I am attractive and I am sexy. Like I take naked photos, but I'm also graduate educated, and I have thoughts and ideas about the world and about politics and things like that, right? So at the time that was relatively rare, and that caught the attention of this woman director that was like, come fly out, put you in girl only. I'll make you like a contract girl, and it'll pay like $1,000 a scene. And I was like, you had me at it pays. And then you added 1,000, and I was like, wow.
Now, were you somebody who identified as heterosexual and you were just going and doing a job, or were you bisexual, or are you
No,
gay?
I was a lesbian. I didn't sleep with a man until I was 21. So then I was like, I guess I'm bisexual. Like I'm now dating a man again after having not dated a man for 10 years. Because after I left the Josh Darling guy, I didn't date men until like 2 years ago. I talked to my boyfriend. I was like, hey, here's this offer. I'm kind of tired of being, poor in New York. And at the same time, my adopted dad was diagnosed with cancer. And so I was like, I want to go back to California and make this money and be with my dad. And my boyfriend was like, yeah, like fucking do it. It was just this point in my life where I was like, I just want to take a risk. Everything I thought I was going to do like went away already. So I'm kind of whatever, like, fuck it. Why not? And, I followed different porn people online because Burning Angel and God's Girls, there was some kind of crossover into porn, like alt porn, like Burning Angel. So I knew some people that were already doing it, and they just seemed really fun. They seemed like they were having a good time, and they were fucking hot people, and they were getting paid a lot of money for it, and they were getting their photos taken, and they got to walk red carpets at AVN and stuff. And like, they just seemed really free. And that was something that I wanted. And so I did it.
What is Burning Angel?
Burning Angel is a porn company that's run by Joanna Angel that was started out of New York that specialized in like heavily tattooed and pierced models. Because this was like, when I got in was at the time when like that wasn't commonplace. It was kind of like if you had tattoos, it was going to make like agents wouldn't sign you because it was like too specific. Like you can't play the girl next door, right? Now you can. Now that is 100% the girl next door. Sasha Grey had kind of popped off, and then she crossed over to like Entourage, and her whole shtick was like, I'm really smart, I'm a cineast, and like it was kind of Tumblr era. So the face of the starlet was starting to change in ways that were very conducive to what I was already doing. So it wasn't as like crazy as it sounds. It kind of, I was halfway in the door already, and thought I would be in for like a few months, take the money, backpack, write the book, same old, same old. And I ended up being an adult for 10 years. Did Girl Girl Only for a very, very long time. And within that genre, like people liked me. They liked to see me perform. So I got booked consistently. Like the average porn career these days is like 18 months. And I was in for 10 years. So that tells you kind of like what.
I'm sure OnlyFans and things have disrupted all of that too. So
yeah, in really positive ways that totally benefit the worker. So I'm all for it. I'm very democratic socialist. It's like, it's just put the means of production in the hands of the workers and let them decide what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and how much they're going to ask for it. And so it's been a super disrupting force, but one that they didn't intend it to be good, but that has been good. Yeah. Like the one thing about sex workers is we're very, very honest people, and we're very, very entrepreneurial. We're very, very adaptable people. We all got here for a ton of different reasons, but the thing we all have in common is that we're incredibly adaptable people, and that we're incredibly honest. Like we're okay with living in the honesty of what things are. So there's that. But yeah, so I was doing that, and I like the first year was really fun. It was super, super fun because like as someone that had been like a really focused student and all of this stuff, it was like I had like been repressing all of that because I didn't want to get pregnant. Because where I was growing up, that was what ruined everyone's life. Was everyone fell in love and got pregnant and then ruined their dreams. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So I had been very reserved in like my sexuality and all of those things, not because I wasn't sexual, but because I was just very concerned about getting attached to someone that was going to hold me back, or having a baby, which I did not want. So when I got into porn, it was kind of like, this is cool. Like everyone's hot, everyone's tested, everyone's really adventurous, and no one's attached. It was so for the first year, it was so fun because it was just a fuck fest, like the safest fuck fest you could ever have with the hottest people you could ever have it with that are like the best at sex. And so I had a really, really good time. And then after like the first year, I was like, okay, but what am I going to do next? I think I was one of the earlier porn people to recognize porn can be great promo for like leveraging to do something else. Like, I think a lot of girls come in now with that mindset. I'm going to use this to build up an audience and build up attention, and then I'm going to leverage it over to the thing I really care about. I think I was probably one of the earlier adopters of that strategy where I was like, okay. And so I started podcasting, thinking, okay, I'm good at talking. People love to come to me for advice. This is like 2014. So podcasting still for a lot of people, like a lot of people still don't even know what a podcast is. But like, I'm just like, okay, like I guested on some podcasts and everyone was like, man, you're really great at this. Like you should get a podcast. And I met a producer that produced some podcasts for other porn girls. And he was like, yeah, I'll totally take you on. And so I decided for the podcast that I would interview comedians about serious topics. And so I went and just found a list, and I knew I couldn't get like big name people but I went and looked up these lists of like top 10 comics to watch. And I went and got all these lists of like who everyone was saying was going to be like the next huge thing. And so I started hitting them up on social media. And what I found out is that everyone loves porn and everyone wants to talk to a porn star. Everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Every last one. Every last one would like to talk to you. I started interviewing comedians and I had on, I mean, just everybody that has specials now and is doing stuff now. Like they were all like guests on my show. And several of them were like, you should do stand up. You're really funny. And so one of my guests was like running a show at the Comedy Store and she said, let me book you. And so she did. And she was like, it's 5 minutes. And I went out and I wrote 5 minutes. And the first time I went up, it was horrible. And as soon as I got off stage, I was like, okay, next time I get up there, I'm going to say this. I know exactly what I'm going to say next time. And that's when I knew that like I was a comedian, because I bombed and I wasn't like, I'm never doing that again. I bombed and I was like, okay, I have to get back up there. That put in me, like, I suddenly felt like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is it. And so I did like 600 spots in like 2 years. I mean, I was just going up every single night. I was determined to be a really good comedian. And I didn't do any jokes about porn, anything about sex work, none of it. I was like, I'm going to like come up there and like on my merits, not the material being shocking, whatever. I started to become friends with all these comedians like Big J. Ogerson, Jim Norton, Mark Maron, like all of these people started kind of taking me under wing and like helping me. And I ended up even going on a tour, like a cross country tour, and like renting out theaters and selling my own tickets, and broke even, but it was really fun. And then the Me Too thing happened with Louis C.K. And I had a breakup with my girlfriend who I'd been with for a couple years. And I think like a lot of comics, I think like a lot of women, when Me Too happened, I think a lot of us like took a step back and were just kind of ruminating on like all of the times and ways that we had been made to feel like intimidated or uncomfortable or not wanted or not worthy or not respected. And that was especially bad in stand-up. And that people always like me because I was like one of the guys. And I was like, yeah, I'm one of the guys because I did porn and you guys are terrified of me. You know, you can't intimidate me because I've had someone with a dick twice as big, like, fuck me. How are you going to intimidate me with like your little shrimp dick? You're not going to do it. So like, I wasn't necessarily directly harassed a lot, but I also had to sit in green rooms and listen to a lot of shit that was just like really fucking gross and scary. And it had made me start to feel and look at the world in a different way. It had made me start to feel like everyone sucks. Men just hate women. Like it had really started to, and that was just ambient. That was just from me listening to them talk. When I'd gone on that tour, there had been a few instances where not other comics, but like bookers and people had like said shit to me. And I just thought I want to do comedy, but like not this way. Like not if like this is the cost of admission, is that like kind of tolerating this stuff. So I like stopped. And like in the middle of all this momentum, I just stopped. It was about like 2018. I just stopped. But I'm like someone that really needs to constantly have something to do. And like I had kind of taken a retirement from porn when I was my girlfriend. She was supporting us. And when we broke up, it's like I had to go back, and that was a little humiliating. But everyone in porn is so cool. It's like no one ever gave me shit about it. Everyone was just like, hey, man, like life happens, you know, sorry about your breakup. Like, you know, like it really is a family because you're such a unique population.
Also, there's a built-in intimacy that I suppose supersedes any of the bullshit that takes years
like there's plenty of bullshit, but like especially when you've been it that long, it's like when I walk into a set, I mean, I retired 4 years ago, but like I could walk into a set and some of these people like filmed my first scene. It's like they don't give a shit if I broke up with someone or had to come back or thought I was too good and then came back. They're just glad I'm alive and I'm okay, and that I, you know, that they're able to still give me work. You know, it's like, but that's kind of like the internal shame thing of what will people think, and it's like they're not.
Yeah,
like, they're fucking not. That's right. Like they're not.
Were you still doing ill repute during this time?
This is when I started ill repute. So because I needed something, I was like, let me do a podcast again, but this time instead of like interviewing people, like I want to make it sort of about something and something meaningful. And so I came up with ill repute, and I got my friend Susie to come co-host it with me. And we kind of had a blast. And we weren't really concerned about growing it or doing anything with it. But for me, it just made me feel like I wasn't being a loser. Like I wasn't just like sitting around on a porn set all day. Like that there was some, like I knew I had to have something that was kind of keeping me going beyond work. And then, after about a year, it's like I started doing stand up again. It was like December. So that had like the breakup kind of happened, went on a trip, did Machu Picchu, did like a tour of Europe, like Switzerland and Sweden and Dublin, and was like doing some stand up, and got back and was like starting to do stand up. It was like December 2019. It was so cool. And I was like, I'm doing stand up again. I'm back. And then in March, the world shut down. So
Yeah.
like, I was like, okay. And so while that was happening, my brother became homeless up in Seattle where he was living. And so I was like, move in with me during the pandemic. So it was me and my older brother, who I hadn't really had a relationship with for like 10 years, in a 1-bedroom apartment. Still felt like I needed to do something. So during the pandemic, I started this poetry project called like 100 Days of Solitude, where I write a different poem every day using a different poetry form. And I had a Patreon for it. And I ended up making like $5,000 from that project because people just joined and supported. And I would just a new poem like every day. While I was doing that, I decided, since the world was going to end, I wanted to do like a bucket list thing. Didn't have a lot of money. I was working at that time. No, what was I doing then? So I was working sporadic. No one was working because it was a pandemic. So even in porn, like people weren't back yet. But I had some savings. And so I decided I wanted to go swim with the manatees in Florida, and that it was going to be like this life-changing event. And I got my friend to agree to go with me. Another friend gave me her airline miles so that like I could fly to Florida. I found the place, flew out there in December of 2020. And as soon as I got in the water, little baby manatee swam up to me and kissed me and like all this stuff. And it was like magical. It was like looking into the face of time itself, like getting under the water and that thing just like coming towards me. And so after that experience, I texted my agent and I was like, 10 years is a long time. I think I'm retired. And I really didn't know what I was going to do next. I had no idea. I came home and I just the podcast had kind of like fallen off, like, because the pandemic, because everyone's life was in shambles. And I was just kind of like journaling every day and just kind of showing up and doing my poetry project. And one day, it was March 6th of 2021, this director and producer named Peter Berg slid into my DMs on Instagram and said that he had read an article I'd written for XO Jane like 8 years ago. And he thought I had just written it. He didn't realize it was like, had been licensed to Huffington Post. And like, it's this article I wrote about dating as a sex worker that gets republished like every 2 years. And like, I'll suddenly get like a flood of stuff on social media from people that have just read it. And he was like, I read your article. Like, would you be interested in writing for television? And so we got on the phone. We met a week later. And I had written, when I broke up with my girlfriend, I'd gotten really drunk one night and done a bunch of cocaine and written a pilot about my life in like 4 hours. Like it had been cooking, but like I just like, and I was like, actually, I have a TV pilot that I wrote about my life, because he had wanted to tap into OnlyFans and sex work and kind of what that world was like, and do some kind of a show, like a scripted series around kind of the people that make the product. And I was like, I have a TV pilot I wrote. And so he asked me to send it to him. So I frantically spent a week like fixing it sober and like sent it to him. And he called me like 2 days later and was like, yeah, I want to make it. Let's take it to Netflix. And so Like by August of that year, like right before my birthday, I got the call that they had bought the pilot.
Oh, wow.
It was kind of crazy. It was such like a mind blowing thing to happen. And then it was like suddenly like I had all this money, which was like, I had always lived in total precarity, but I knew like I can't spend it because like the show might not get green. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. So it was kind of like this weird thing of like, I have it, but like, I don't want to spend any of it because I don't know how long I'm going to have to live off of this. It was kind of this magical time. Like there was like a year where I just, like, we were trying to find people to read it, attach a director, do this, do that, get it greenlit. But it was this magical time of no worry, probably for the first time in my entire life, where it was just like, everything's fine. Everything's gonna be okay. Like everything. So people say money can't buy happiness, but like 90% of my mental illness left my body when I got that check. It was crazy. And so for a year, I just kind of like went through a lot of emotional turmoil, like cut out a bunch of toxic relationships, got with my current partner, just did a lot of work on myself because I had the time to do it. And then wrote 2 more pilots, but still wasn't doing stand-up again. Like I still didn't know how to like come back to it. And then just ahead of the strikes, I got the call that they were shelving the show. So it was dead in the water. And I was like, okay, this is okay. Like, this is a lot. But then again, kind of had the same experience I had with the whole Me Too thing, which is during the strikes and everything else, just seeing how the industry was changing, but also how horrible experiences so many people were talking about on Twitter, just like they're like these horrible experiences that they were having in writers' rooms. And I was like, do I even want to be in an industry that has all of these problems? I don't think this is sustainable. And so that's when I decided to revitalize the podcast and like take it a lot more seriously and start to treat it like a business, like a project. And I got a new co-host, my best friend, Ella, and my brother, who is like a producer and had been an animator in different things. He produces it and does all the video. And we've actually been like we were like in the top 50 for history. The response has been so good. When you texted me, I was working on the pitch deck for one of those other, I wrote 2 pilots while I was in development with my first pilot. So I'm finishing up the decks for those and like hoping to take them out. And then when we redid the podcast, 2 producers reached out to me asking if I'd be interested in adapting the podcast for television. And I was like, yeah. So I'm in the middle of writing the pilot for that and doing the pitch deck for that. I just keep showing up and like something always kind of works out. And I just hope that continues. I don't know. I was really worried for a while, but over the past few months, like kind of calm has come over me in terms of like, we're all in this together. Like nobody knows what's going to happen, but there's freedom and kind of, I'm back at the place I was when I got into porn, which is I'm at this place of having everything planned out didn't work because life happens, a writer's strike happens, a pandemic happens, and so I've kind of just got this calm and I'm like, just like Peter called, like I got that DM like out of the blue. We had never interacted. We had never anything. He was looking for IP and had come across my article on the Huffington Post, which had been written 6 years previous to that, had been licensed by Exo Jane over to Huffington Post. Exo Jane doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, I love Jane. Jane was a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, but it was like such a so random. So I just kind of keep telling myself that if I just kind of keep showing up and putting my work out there, you just never know, and that if not, then I'll fall into something, but everything will be okay.
So tell people how they can find you if they want to look you up or learn more about you and your projects and things.
So you can find everything about me at sovereignsyre.net. That's everything. So yeah, but my podcast is called Ill Repute, and it is anywhere that you pod. It comes out every Monday. We just did a 2-parter on Gretchen Whitmer, and the thesis of the show is basically women throughout history that were kind of overlooked, or their stories were sanitized, or they were kind of footnoted or sidelined by the men in their lives.
Yeah.
And that one's really fun. And the response, I really like it because what I had noticed was there's all these like baby hoes and younger women that don't realize that there's been like a long line of like hoes before them that changed the world for them. Being able to get divorced, Lizzie Lape, who ran a chain of brothels and didn't want to have to give them to her husband. That was a prostitute that did that, right? Like there's so many stories like that. And I just wanted to tell them so that young women could realize that, like, even if you're not like a good girl or your life doesn't look like the way you're told it should, that doesn't mean that you can't be really powerful and successful and have all of the things and live a badass life. And so as long as I get to like continue that tradition, I'm really happy. It makes me feel like I'm doing something productive. The political tides have turned. The misogyny is very real. That's like the gender divides between men and women for young people, and by that I mean between say 15 and 25, has never been wider. So, you know, this generation that's coming up, I have a lot of empathy for, because it's going to be like a tough road because of not necessarily the strides of feminism, but because of a lot of, it was a problem before Donald Trump came into office. It was something that was growing, and it has to do with the internet, and it has to do with social media, and it has to do with the loss of like third spaces. I was doing the ancestry for my family, and all of my people, almost all of them came from Appalachia and Tennessee. And neighbors were like miles and miles away. And so you had to have socials so that young people could like meet each other, and like, and then everyone got married to like the first person. And those things are valuable, you know, when you're a kid and after school, like you go hang out at the cafe or you go hang out at the mall, like those things are very important for allowing for like socialization outside of the eyes of parents. And with the rise of social media and with gaming, you know, young people especially don't leave the house very much. And that makes them, it's a lot easier to radicalize people when they're alone, you know. And I think that the fallout of that is going to be longstanding. And I really think that in 30 years, people will look back and be like, they just let anyone have social media. Like, that's crazy. I think they're going to, the way that we used to give kids cocaine for toothaches is, I think the way we're going to feel about the idea that like we let kids use social media without like any kind of regulation around it. Because I mean, we're going to be feeling the fallout for a very, very long time.
I mean, we changed their brains. We've changed our own brains, but we've really changed their brains. And
yeah, but like that radicalization, this is just my pet theory, but everyone's talking about like their parents and grandparents getting QAnoned by Facebook. And then all of these young boys are getting red pilled and stuff by like gaming culture and YouTube red pill content. And like, what's the common denominator there? Is it's like populations that are neglected. You know, old people are lonely. Yeah. And they don't have a sense of purpose. And they get online and they're doing QAnon and they feel a sense of purpose and they're part of a community and like they're doing something. And so they get sucked into it for like the social aspect of it, even if it means having to digest this rhetoric that's pretty abhorrent. With young men, it's the same situation. It's like they feel neglected, you know, because there was so much focus put on bringing girls up to like try to close that gender gap. And they don't feel like there's a place for them. And then they go on to these forums and suddenly they feel seen. And even if that means they have to mirror back this rhetoric until they believe it. And so that, I think like people blame Donald Trump, but I feel like that's letting Mark Zuckerberg off a little too easy. Yeah. You know? Yeah.
Well, Donald Trump's also a product of his upbringing.
Yeah.
But those games, I mean, I've seen how many women are murdered in those games is insane.
So like Native Americans have like the highest rate of enlistment in the military of like any ethnic group. And a lot of Native American scholars have said that it has to do with like that Native American culture, like masculinity rituals. Like you had to touch someone in war, right? You had to do a coup to like achieve manhood. And that within the Native American community has kind of like subsumed that role. And I'm using that example because it's kind of like it's more naked. When these guys get on the games, it's the way they talk to each other. It's like, you fucking pussy, like you dumb bitch, like it's a way of, it's kind of the same thing. It's this masculinity ritual, except it's virtual.
Yeah.
And that's why when girls try to go into that space, they're like, get the fuck out of here. Like, you should go get raped. Like, they're saying all that stuff because it's like they don't want, it's like, this is our, like, we're doing man things. We're becoming men in here. Like, get out of here. And so I think it's also part of that, where it's not even like what they're doing in the game, but it's the culture they're creating with each other.
Yeah, but there's no elders, right? There's no elders in a video game world. There's no elders in the social media world. There's no elders in a parasocial relationship. There's no one guiding them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really concerned. And I noticed it too, just even with my own, that money, that really fixed a lot of stuff. And once I got like actual success, like I wrote a thing and then I sold the thing and then I cashed the check for the thing. Like that was my first big girl pants, like, especially with like my creative work, right? I've obviously had jobs, but like that was like my first validation. Like, yes, you are good. You are good at your job. You are a good writer. Here is some money. And once I had that validation, it was like suddenly I saw the world. It was like the Matrix. It was just like binary code, like running up and down everything. And I realized how much of my life I had lived on social media, just like trying to escape into this virtual world where like I was an important person and I was accomplished and like whatever, because I had like a Twitter account. You know what I mean? Like it was the Twitter account. It's not an accomplishment. But it creates the illusion that you're doing something. It's the illusion of interacting. You know, you post a selfie, it gets a bunch of likes. Your brain is like, you just did something. Like you don't even realize that like it's taking the place of actually doing stuff in the real world. It's like you're LARPing your life. And I think also like with social media, it used to be fun. And I found myself slowly over time, like retreating from posting, because it used to be I could post a joke and people are like, oh, haha, or whatever. And like maybe once in a while, someone would be like, oh, that fucking wasn't funny. Now I could post anything and there will be at least 5 comments in there being like, dumb bitch.
Right.
Like, and I mean, it could just be, I could just be posting a picture of a book I'm reading. And it like, and that is something that has changed since 2016. And so it also like, so for me, it kind of chased me off the platform because I was like, I don't have time.
You do a lot of TikTok though. I've seen you a lot on TikTok.
I'm getting back into it. It's like I think there was just a period of time where I just retreated from the world because I just was in like a hermetical place. I was just in the hermit phase of a growth cycle. I feel like all cycles kind of, there's like a hermit phase and then you kind of come out and you go up and then you kind of reflect and then you kind of go back down and then, you know, and I think I was just, for a while, I was just in like a hermit phase where I was just gestating, you know, like a bunch of things happened and I was like processing. And so when I got the check for the show and I was like, oh, I don't have to do sex work anymore. Like it was an intense 1.5 or 2 years of just processing. Cause it was like, suddenly I was processing all of the bad things that had come along with that. And who am I? And what is my identity? And what's my identity if I'm not that thing? Because I've been that thing for 10 years. And like, what would my identity be like if I wasn't that person? And it's also like having the opportunity to reinvent myself, which, you know, we're lucky to do sometimes. But it was like, oh, I get to be a writer now. Like, what kind of a presence do I want to be? You know? And so I've just recently gotten back into posting like on TikTok, and the bulk of it really is kind of political commentary.
Yeah.
You know, even though that can be scary to do because people are definitely leaving really shitty comments, but like I'm finding my voice again. because it's not constrained by having to be sexy or having to maintain the illusion that sex work isn't work. Or there were all these constraints on like kind of how I could portray myself because of my day job, which is selling a fantasy of who I am. And so to be free of that for like 4 years now, I'm just barely coming into a place of like, who am I without having to have those restrictions? And it's kind of fun. It's like, there are no stakes. And so I get to play around a little more and so I'm still kind of finding my voice in that regard. And then I've started doing stand-up a lot more again. I finally got back into it. And this time I'm totally talking about sex work. It's really wild. And people that knew me from before, like, I never thought I'd hear you tell a joke about sucking dick. And I was like, me either, man.
Well, you'll have to let me know when you have stand-up, when you're doing it.
I will, totally. I think we're doing a show next month, maybe. We're working on a secret show.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.